Okay, hi everyone. So today we'd like to discuss another topics in our syllabus, which is Malaysian foreign policy, which I'm sure when you read the MIB, you can see one of the things that we have to discuss under main policies in Malaysia is about the Malaysian foreign policy. Okay, but before we begins, okay, to see the principles and also the elements of the Malaysian foreign policy, let's figure out the meanings of the word policy itself. So basically, literally, the word policy can be defined as a plan, strategy, or schedule. In the proper way of defining it, we define policy as a course of action adopted or chosen or decided with the purpose. And who will carry out, who will execute the policy? Basically, it is a role of the governments to formulate and also to execute a policy. And basically, policy being addressed by the government to solve a specific issue. Not only that, policy also being formulated by the governments in order to introduce a new programs or maybe perhaps to fulfill the demands of the people. And as been discussed by the Charles and also Eloise, public policy consists of political decisions for implementing programs to achieve the societal goods. Okay, so we already clear what is a policy is all about. Now let's look at what is a foreign policy. Foreign policy is a self-interest strategy chosen by the state to safeguard its national interest and to achieve its goal in international relations. In other words, foreign policy should help a country or state to conduct and also to regulate its international relations with foreign countries, and sometimes also it do includes how the countries should deals with several international organizations that we have at the international level. And foreign policy is not new. Basically, if we look at into the early civilization like Mesopotamia, Wanghu, Egypt, and also Indus, this early civilization they also did a foreign context with other civilization. So in other words, we can say that it is one level of a human interactions. Now, talking about the Malaysian foreign policy, let's see what are the factors or what are the indicators that influence Malaysian foreign policy. In other words, whenever Malaysia wants to make its stance over an international issues or perhaps to build a diplomatic relationship with the foreign countries, what are the things that will be taken into consideration? The first one, the historical factor. So basically, historical will play a role in deciding which country that we are going to have a foreign relationships. For instance, with the China, why we Malaysian has one of the reasons why Malaysia have diplomatic relations with the China because of the historical context that we have with the China since in the era of Malacca Sultanate. Number two is a geographical factor. So basically, geographical factor explains why we have a very close relationship with the ASEAN's country like Myanmar, Vietnam, Philippines, and also Thailand. Because we hopes that by having a good relationship with our neighboring countries, definitely we can rely and we can get some help from these countries whenever there is a crisis which require us to seek for the foreign help or assist. Number three is a national interest. No matter which countries you go, national interest will always serve as a main factor in determining the foreign policy of that particular country. And the same things go to the with our country, Malaysia. And if you analyze Malaysian foreign policy, one of the elements that being considered under the national interest is a security factor or security purpose. So means that we are going to make sure that whenever we have a foreign relationship, it will not give any harm to our country. Number four, demography. What we means by demography is a similarity that we have with other countries. For instance, why we have a very close relationship with the Middle East countries, because we have these countries, including us, we are known as a Muslim countries, where we have a Muslim as a biggest groups of people in this country. And why we have a good relationship with the Brazil, for instance, because we have a similarity in terms of the nature or the backgrounds of Khatulistiwa countries of backgrounds. And the last one is a global issue. So by having a certain issues which require us to collaborate or to sit together with others country, it's also will influence a foreign policy in Malaysia. Now, let's look at on the developments of the Malaysian foreign policy. As I mentioned to you, okay, it is not a new, okay, for Malaysians to conduct or to have a diplomatic relationship. Since in the era of Malacca Sultanate, also we can see that the rulers in the Malacca Sultanate, they also had established a foreign relationship with others kingdoms or other civilizations. For instance, during the Malacca Sultanates, the rulers of Malacca, they have made sure that they have a very good contacts not only with the China empire, but they also have a very good relationship with the neighboring countries like Siam's kingdoms and also some of the kingdoms in the Sumatra Islands. And basically, the foreign relationship also been continued during the colonial era, where we have been conquered by Portuguese on the 1511s, followed by the Dutch, and then we have a British, and also we have a one-shot periods of colonization by the Japanese. And during these periods of the colonization, we also adopted certain elements, okay, from their approach or from their policy in dealings with the foreign country. And of course, after we got independence in 1957, Malaysian governments, okay, has taken its own way of conducting a foreign affair at the international level. Now, what is the objective of a Malaysian foreign policy? So it is a very clear, okay, by looking into the factor itself, so we know that the main objective of the Malaysian foreign policy is to preserve the national interest of Malaysia at the international level. In doing so, there are three major principles, okay, on how we can achieve the objective of the Malaysian foreign policy. The first one, to maintaining peaceful relationship with all countries, regardless of its ideology and also political system. This principle, it explains why Tengku Abdul Rahman, the second Malaysian Prime Minister, have a diplomatic relationship with the China governments in 1970. So it shows that even though China governments known has adopted communist as an their ideology, but it doesn't prevent us from having a diplomatic relationships with the China governments. Second principle is adopting an independence, non-aligned principle stance in regional and also international diplomatic affairs. Means, in other words, that we are trying to take a very neutral stance whenever there is a dispute, not only at the international level but also at the regional level, and we are not going to interfere others' affairs as we respect uh, the sovereignty or the freedoms of others countries. And the last one, to forging close relationships and economic partnership with all nations, particularly with ASEAN and other regional friends. And this principle is has been realized clearly under the leadership of Malaysian fourth Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir, where basically he made sure that whenever Malaysia have diplomatic relationships, economic factor will be taken into considerations. Now, the other principles to achieve this objective, to promote the peace and stability in the region through capacity building and conflict resolution measures. Not only that, we also playing an influential leadership roles as a chair of ASEAN's Non-Aligned Movement, or known as a NAM, and also Organization of Islamic Conference, OIC. Nevertheless, participating actively and meaningfully in the United Nations, especially in the efforts to end injustice, oppression, and to uphold international law, and lastly, is projecting Malaysia as a leading example of a tolerant and progressive Islamic nations. So these principles basically help us to secure and to preserve our national interest at the international level. Now, by looking into the screens, okay, we are going to see the players and also the process which are involved in formulating Malaysian foreign policy. So basically, the decisions to have a foreign relationships or to make any stance in any global issues or crisis, it will be done by the cabinets. And one decision has been done by the cabinets after receiving the inputs from the public, international organization, think tanks, and also private sector. This decision will be executed by a numbers of the government agencies like Wisma Putra, or also known as Foreign Affairs Ministry. It also will be executed by the Prime Minister Office, or we call it as a JPM, and it also be executed by others institution or agencies like a JPA, MDT, and also MITI, Economics Ministry. So these are the example of the ministries. They will be involved in the process of executing Malaysia's foreign policy decision, which have been made by the cabinets. Now, the next thing that we would like to see is the evaluations of the Malaysian's foreign policy under the um, fifth Malaysian Prime Ministers. Okay, so basically, under the first Prime Minister Tunku Abdul Rahman's, okay, basically after we got independence in 1957, okay, we took a pro-Western stance where we have a very close relationship with the Western country, especially with the UK. And there are numbers of the reasons why we have a very close relationship with the UK government. One of the reason is because of the Anglo-Malayan Defence Agreements, which was signed by Malaysia and also British government just before we got independence in 1957. But beside taking a pro-Western stand at the international level, we also oppose the apartheid policy in the South Africa, and we also propose the associations of the Southeast Asian ASA, and we also becomes one of the founder of the ASEAN organizations in 1957, and under the leadership of Tunku Abdul Rahman, OIC was formed in 1917 as well. So these are the things that has been done under the first Prime Minister Tunku Abdul Rahman. Under the leadership of the second Prime Minister Tun Abdul Razak, we are moving from the pro-Western stance to the non-alliance or to the neutral stance at the international levels. Means that we are trying not only to be seen as a supporter or as a alliance of the Western country, but we also want to have a good relationship with the non-Western countries like China, Cuba, and also North Korea. Means, in other words, that we are trying to be friends with all the countries regardless of their political systems and also ideology. Under the leaderships of the Tun Hussein On, the third Malaysian Prime Ministers, this period was known as a period of consolidations, which means that we are trying to strengthening the relationships that we have with the China and India in order to increase the foreign investments in Malaysia. Not only that, we also focus and give a full commitments in ASEAN. Means we are participating in all ASEAN's programs and activities. Beside, we also give a full commitments to the NAMs, non-alliance movements. Under Tun Dr. Mahathir, the Malaysian fourth Prime Ministers, okay, our foreign policy has been driven by the economic orientations, and it can be looked, okay, by a numbers of policy that has been introduced by the Tun Dr. Mahathir. Number one, look its policies, where basically we try to have a very good relationship with the developed Asian countries like South Korea, Taiwan's, Hong Kong's, and also Japan's. And not only that, we are trying to use this country as our role model in developing our economies. We also, under his leadership, also we become very strong critics of Western powers, and we are also becomes the leaders or to voice out the rights of the third world countries. And for that purpose, Tun Dr. Mahathir has proposed the South-South cooperations in 1980s. And we also involved in the various international initiative which has been organized not only by the OIC, NAM, ASEAN, but also by the United Nations. Under the fifth Malaysian Prime Minister, Tun Abdullah Ahmad Badawi, we try to take a more pragmatic approach. Means that we, whenever we are dealing with the foreign countries or when we attend any functions at the international levels, we try to use a diplomacy as our tools in dealings with the global issues. And we also try to maintain a good relationship with the West and also with the Australia as a neighboring country to the ASEANs, and we also take a leadership roles in NAM, ASEAN, and also OIC. And under Datuk Seri Najib Tun Razak, the sixth Malaysian Prime Ministers, okay, his foreign policy has been mainly influenced by the GTP, known also as a government transformations programs, and also new economics model, where basically under these two policies, Datuk Sri Najib tried to image Malaysia as a progressive, modern, and developing Islamic nations. And we also continue the diplomacy approach which has been taken by the previous leaderships, where we become so proactive role in the diplomacy. And under his leadership also we have very good and strong relationship with the China. And in 2015 we have been appointed to play a role as a ASEAN chair. Now, besides having a diplomatic relationship with other countries, we also have joined several international organizations. And this international organization can be divided into two categories. The first one, we call it as a regional international organizations. And there are numbers of the regional organization that have been joined by Malaysia. The first one, known as ASA. The second one, Mafelindo, in 1963. And the third one is ASEAN, which was formed in 1948. Not only we join international organization at the regional level, but we also join international organization at the global level. There are numbers of the international organizations at the global level that have been joined by Malaysia. The first one, Commonwealth, where basically this is a organization which comprise of the British ex-colonial countries. And then we also joined United Nations soon after we got independence in 1957. We also become one of the members in the NAMS, Non-Alliance Movement. And in 1970, our first Prime Minister has proposed the formations of the Organization of Islamic Conference, also known as an OIC. Under the leadership of Tun Dr. Mahathir, we have forms G15 as a platform to voice out the rights and also to build a mutual cooperation between the third world countries. And last but not least, APEC, also known as ASEAN Pacific Economic Cooperation. So these are some of the international organizations that has been joined by Malaysia at the global level, apart from the regional international organization like ASEAN. So basically, from this lecture, what we can conclude is that none of the country in this world can rely by its own self. In other words, any country in this world, okay, it must have or must conduct foreign relationship with others